So it's now time of our keynote. The speaker will be Jinsop Lee, an industrial designer. He is Chief Globalization Officer at Linno. Like many designers, his career started when he was 5 years old, building toys with Lego bricks. Since then, he has become a multidisciplinary designer, making use of the design process in a variety of jobs. In 2012, he was one of the winners of the TED Global Talent Search. He was speaking about the connection between design and the 5 senses. This is a new theory, and he will share it with us today. Please welcome Jinsop Lee.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Solidworks for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. And also, I want to thank all of you. Thanks so much for waking up this early to hear me talk. All right. You know, I had the great fortune of living in 5 different countries while I was growing up. This is my family and I. We're in Pakistan, and I'm probably about 5 years old at the time. Now, in this very garden, we had this really cool gardener with a big handlebar mustache, and he did all the pruning with a machete, and he cultivated a massive field of poppies. Now, obviously, the reason was for the production of heroin and opium. My family, we were so naive, we had no idea what was going on. Now, so obviously, this picture was taken after we found out we got rid of the poppies. A few years later, we moved to Mauritania, which is this massive country in Northwest Africa that nobody's ever heard of. Now, in Mauritania, I saw many wonderful things, like I literally witnessed the plague of locusts. And locusts really like to bask in warm places. So on some mornings, every inch of that car would literally be covered in locusts, and we'd have to wipe the locusts away from the door handle to get into the car. Right. The bulk of my early education happened at boarding school in England, hence the accent. The easiest way to describe boarding school in England is it's literally like the Harry Potter movies, except we didn't have the good food or the magic. Try to spot me in this picture. Right. Okay. Now, actually, for my higher education, I got to come here to the US. And I attended this really fantastic institute called Syracuse University, where I studied under people like Professor Malinowski. Oh, thank you. Now, Professor Malinowski, when he was younger, was on the design team for the original Mustang. So his first project to us, he asked us to design a vehicle that could explore the surface of Mars. So here's the vehicle I designed. The chassis of this vehicle is actually based on the backbone of living creatures. So the chassis itself could undulate over the terrain of Mars. Also, it was a modular design, so if you needed a larger vehicle, you just simply add more backbone pieces. I had a great time at Syracuse. After Syracuse, of course, I became a design consultant, and it was the perfect job for me. Every project lasted a few months, and then after a few months, we'd move on to a new project, and I'd get to design something completely new and learn about a new field. Now, one of the projects we worked on was a compact kitchen for the Asian market. So my team and I realized the best compact kitchens are the food preparation areas inside airplanes. So I called up Korean Air, and I asked them to lend us a Boeing 747, and they said no. However, all credit to them, they did let us use this. This is actually the cabin crew training area, and it's a full-size mock-up of a Boeing 747. So a lot of the solutions that came out in our final design came from the time we spent in this area. And, okay, this is a little different. After that, like every South Korean male, I had to do the military service. Now, this picture is a little deceiving. It makes me look like I did really cool stuff. In reality, for 2 years, I cleaned a lot of toilets. However, I did have a good time there as well. And after the military, I had a new opportunity. So I got to become a university professor for industrial design. And honestly, it was a brilliant job because you get to design the most important thing of all, and that is, of course, young, enthusiastic people, and you can guide them into becoming, or help them into becoming the designers they want to become. So here, I've taken the class on a field trip to Porsche. And then, here I am today. So now I work for this company called Lino, and we develop very innovative LED lighting systems. And obviously, from this picture, you can see I have a great time doing it. So you can see from this brief summary of my life that basically one of the goals in my life is to always have new experiences and to interact with new people, and that helps me stay creative. Now, let's backpedal a little bit to when I was a university professor. Now, I love the teaching job part of the job, but I was told that one of the duties of the job was to write an academic paper. So I read a few academic papers, and they're really, really boring. So I'm a designer. I thought, OK, let's design something so this process becomes more fun. So in order to do that, I came up with something called the 5 senses theory. The 5 senses theory is simply a way to gauge or judge different experiences from the point of view of the 5 senses. So in order to do this, I developed something called the 5 senses graph. Now, along the y-axis, you have a scale from 0 to 10, and along the x-axis, you have the 5 senses. It's not scientific, but that's OK. I'm a designer. So here's how the 5 senses graph works.
Hey, my name is Jinsop, and today I'm going to show you what riding motorbikes is like from the point of view of the 5 senses. Oi!
This is Denver, custom bike designer.
And that is how the 5 senses graph works. So, you know, for a period of time, myself and, of course, people I knew and, of course, my students, we all gathered data for different experiences we had. So we kept something like a 5 senses diary. I gathered a lot of results, sometimes for very mundane experiences, like eating instant noodles or even clubbing. But then I started looking for more intense experiences. So I tried things like bungee jumping for the first time. And then I thought, well, maybe I could find something even better than bungee jumping. So I took a trip to the Philippines, and I learned how to fly a plane. Now, this is my pilot or instructor, Nico. And when he heard about what I was doing, he was like, OK, let me show you something. So he took this little Cessna to an extremely high altitude. And then he let the plane free fall and began spinning the plane at the same time. So according to, remember, this is all in the name of academic research. So these are how the two experiences, bungee jumping and free fall spinning in a Cessna, compare according to the 5 senses graph. And if you want to find the more intense experience, please go to the Philippines and talk to Nico. So this whole time, I was always trying to find maybe something close to the perfect experiences according to the 5 senses. And of course, on the graph, it would look like this. It would be a horizontal line along the top. And, you know, through all the years, all the data I gathered, only one experience came close to being the perfect experience. And that experience was great sex. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this, now, this actually makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, great sex is one of the few experiences we can have where all of the 5 senses are stimulated at a great level. And honestly, you know, that's what this theory started teaching me about design. As a designer, we're always designing for the experience of the end user. And what this theory taught me was, when I'm designing a design or a service for the end user, when I can incorporate more of the senses for that end user, it becomes a better design. It becomes a better experience. Now, let me show you a few examples of where that's happening, you know, obviously already. This is the interior of an Audi, and I recently learned that Audi has, in their design department, an odor team. And that's just like what it sounds like. They are in charge of designing the smell of the inside of Audis. All right, here's the next example. This is, and you know, this shows your age if you recognize this, obviously, right? Yeah. So I spent many hours with this controller. This is the controller for the Nintendo NES, and I loved it. It's brilliant. I actually didn't get another games console for an extremely long time until the same company came out with this. It is, of course, the controller for the Nintendo Wii. Now, I had to buy this because once I saw it, I realized that they'd really gone out and changed the gaming experience. So let me show you on the 5 senses graph. Now, previous game consoles, the experience of playing a game for the end user, it's really fun for the eyes, obviously, and the sound, too. They sound great. But none of the other senses are affected that much. However, the Nintendo Wii completely changes the gaming experience because to interact with the game itself, it adds motion. So, now, up till this point in my theory, I'd always been thinking about how the 5 senses theory affects the end user. And I thought, all right, how do I take this theory further? So I started exploring how the 5 senses theory affects the design process itself. All right, so here's how I'll show you that. All right, this is the Swiss Army knife. Now, as a kid, I always carried the Swiss Army knife with me, and I used it frequently. It was the perfect tool for the analog era that I grew up in. In fact, you know, in Korea, the Swiss Army knife became popular because of an 80s show that featured this guy. So actually in Korea, to this day, the Swiss Army knife is known as the MacGyver knife. Now, I no longer carry the Swiss Army knife, for better or for worse. Instead, now I carry this. And this is, of course, the smartphone. This is the multi-purpose tool of the digital age that I live in. And I have a feeling that if MacGyver was around today, this is all he'd carry around as well. The thing is that that same transition from analog to digital has happened in so many areas, especially also for design tools. When I was in university, we hardly ever touched a computer. Now, so much of design takes place on the computer. And of course, they should. Digital design tools are great. They're fast, they're quick, they're convenient, and they allow things to happen that perhaps wouldn't even have been possible with analog design tools. In fact, that's why we're all here, because we're all avid fans of SolidWorks. But, all right, however, let me ask you this. Has that transition to digital design tools made the end result better. All right, let's have a look. All right, this is the BMW Z4. And this is, of course, very much a product of the digital design tool era. And it is a very handsome and competent car. If anyone from BMW is here, if you were to give me one of these cars, I would happily drive it every single day. All right, now let me show you something a little different. This is the Jaguar E-Type. This car was introduced in 1961. Now, the Jaguar E-Type, you know, the people that designed this did not have access to digital design tools at all. They had blocks of clay, and they would just whittle away at these blocks of clay until they got the final desired shape. Now, actually, comparing these two cars is quite fair, I think, because they're, you know, similar categories of cars, but also, when adjusted for inflation, the price of these two cars are quite similar. Now, you know, there's a 50-year gap between these two cars. So the people that designed the car on top had, you know, 50 more years of design know-how and far better digital design tools, or far better tools in general. However, purely from a design point of view, if I were to put one of these two cars in my garage today, I'm not sure that I'd choose the car on top. And actually, you see that in a lot of design today, where the digital era versions of designs today are not necessarily far better than their analog era equivalents. Now, to explore that area too, I started to think about what made me become a designer in the first place when I was young. Here's another video.
Hey, when I was little, I built some model kits. A lot of model kits. One day, I was building a World War II fighter plane when I realized the wheels were missing. This was a severe problem because without any wheels, the plane would not be able to take off or land safely. So, after a refreshing little cry, I got a knife and hacked the wings up, added some tiny harness straps, and glued some enthusiastic plastic horses where the wheels should have been. Thus, problem was solved. I remember proudly showing this to my dad and him saying, "Well done." After some thought, he went on to say that my plane was an example of something called design. The rest, well, it's history. Hi, I'm Jinsop Lee, and
All right. Now, since many of you in the audience are designers and engineers, I suspect that many of you have had some experience with model kits as well. Okay? Now, if you think about the experience of building a model kit, it is very much a delight for the senses, right? I mean, obviously there's sight, where you get to watch a whole bunch of individual tiny parts coming together to what you're building. And then, of course, touch. Model making is an extremely hands-on experience. You're always touching the parts, you're putting them together, you're sanding it, and you're molding it into the shape that you want. Smell, of course. Model paints and glue have an extremely distinctive smell. And then, yeah, there's sound. For me, when some of the hand tools that I would use while building model kits, like the Dremel, and also when I put together a gearbox when I was young, and then I'd finally hook up a motor to it, and if the gearbox sounded smooth, I'd know that I'd put it together correctly. In fact, the experience of making model kits is very similar to another passion of mine, which is, of course, riding motorbikes. So both experiences for me, they're not necessarily about the destination, but they're more about the journey. And the journey in both cases stimulates many of my senses. And that's what I realized. You know, in fact, when I design today, I still use very much the analog way of design. A few years ago, I was designing USB speakers. Now, the concept for this design was to upcycle old telephone handsets. So I didn't have to redesign the telephone handset, but I did redesign the grills that would be attached to the telephone handset. And, you know, during the development process, I got a lot of foam, and I just started carving away at the foam until I got the shape that I wanted. It was only after I completed and got that final shape that we 3D scanned it into a digital design tool and worked on the details. So this is what the final design came out. Right? So, and it's not just me, I'm not the only one that still designs in an analog manner. a few years ago, I went to a Pixar exhibit, and because the end result for Pixar is always computer generated, I thought that I would see a lot of 3D modeling, et cetera, but instead I saw pencil sketches and collages, and this collage was really cutouts from magazines. In fact, this collage later became this character from The Incredibles. And then, of course, I saw clay models. And it was only when they finally fully fleshed out the development of a character that they transferred that data into a digital design tool. And I wonder why this was, and I thought about it, and I realized perhaps for people like me, one of the reasons I still like the analog design tool way of doing things is because during the design process, if more of my senses are affected, it makes me more creative. In effect, it makes me a better designer, and the end result becomes better. So here's what I realized. I really think that SolidWorks, eventually, SolidWorks is going to build the perfect digital design tool. And that perfect digital design tool is going to be a tool that affects many of the 5 senses, if not all of them. Now, I'm not sure what this design tool is going to look like. It could be a helmet with wires coming out of it. It could be something that looks like virtual reality gear. All I know is it's going to be great. And one thing is, when I'm using that version of SolidWorks, I know how the perfect digital design tool is going to make me feel. It's going to make me feel exactly like I did when I was a kid building model kits. And that's it. Thank you very much.